It's January 3rd, 2017, around 5:15 in the evening. A young man stumbles onto West Side near Homan and Lexington Street, bloodied and disoriented. He's wearing an inside-out tank top, jean shorts, and sandals, despite the freezing winter weather that gripped the city. The young man, whom we will refer to as Michael to protect his identity, was spotted by a police officer named Michael Donnelly, who immediately called for an ambulance while trying to piece together what could have possibly happened to this person. But to understand how he ended up on that street, we need to go back 3 days to where this case actually began. On New Year's Eve of 2016, Michael was dropped off at a McDonald's restaurant in Streamwood, Chicago, by his parents who believed he was meeting a friend from school for a sleepover. The friend's name was Jordan Hill, someone he'd known from an alternative high school in Aurora, a non-traditional school designed to meet the needs of students who may not be able to fit into a regular high school environment. Michael had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and ADHD, making him particularly vulnerable and trusting of people he considered friends. His family described him as someone who was eager for social connections and genuinely believed Jordan cared about him. So when Jordan suggested they hang out over the winter holiday break, it seemed completely normal. However, when Jordan showed up to pick Michael up on that fateful day, he was driving a van instead of his own car, and rather than heading to his house for the promised sleepover, they just drove around with no real destination. They spent January 1st and 2nd driving aimlessly around Chicago's west side, visiting friends, smoking pot, and at one point sleeping in the van overnight because they had nowhere else to go. Then on January 2nd, all communication with his family suddenly stopped. Michael's parents tried calling his phone repeatedly throughout the day, but got no response. By the end of the day, growing increasingly worried about their son's safety, they filed a missing person report with local police. That same day, Jordan and Michael arrived at an apartment in the 3300 block of West Lexington Avenue on Chicago's west side. The third-floor apartment belonged to two sisters, Brittany Covington, who was 18 at the time, and Tanisha Covington, who was 24, and another friend of Jordan's named Tesfaye Cooper was hanging out there as well. The group decided to get into what they called a play fight that would soon turn into something far darker than anyone could have imagined. Over the next 24 to 48 hours, the four of them subjected Michael to horrific maltreatment in that cramped third-floor apartment, while his family desperately searched for any sign of him. They tied his hands and feet together tightly with bright-colored bands, bound his neck with a leash so they could drag him about with it, and even stuffed a sock in his mouth before taping it shut so he couldn't scream for help. The young man was forced into a corner, where his back against the wall, barely able to move as his captors circled around him. It was at this point that Brittany Covington pulled out her phone and started live streaming on Facebook under the name Brittany Herring. For about 28 to 30 minutes, she broadcast the violence to anyone scrolling through their feed. Throughout the stream, Brittany kept turning the camera back to her own face, laughing and acting like this was just a normal night. Around her, Jordan Hill, Tesfaye Cooper, and her sister Tanisha moved in and out of frame as the violence escalated. A few seconds into the broadcast, they pulled out knives and slashed Michael's sweatshirt sleeves. They punched, slapped, and kicked him repeatedly while laughing. Someone ordered, "Smack his," and the camera caught a kick landing between his legs. The same voice commanded, "Smack it again," while the others kept laughing. They waved a knife inches from his face, watching him flinch with each pass. Then they stuck one of the knives to his scalp, cutting away a patch of hair and leaving visible blood streaming down his head. At some point, they grabbed a strap around his neck and yanked it like a leash while he desperately tried to hold it away from his throat to keep from choking. One of them also sprinkled cigarette ashes onto his wounds.
No, this the ashtray!
And as if that was not enough, they made him kiss the floor, then shoved his head down into a toilet bowl and forced him to drink from it. And while his face was in the toilet, they ordered him to repeat, "I love black people," over and again, while making anti-Trump chants and using racial slurs. One of the perpetrators said he would love to stuff Michael in a car trunk and put a brick on the gas so he can crash to death.
I'm gonna put this in the trunk, and we're gonna put a brick on the gas.
While all of this was happening, Jordan called the victim's mother and demanded a $300 ransom for her son's release. The screaming and stomping coming from the apartment quickly caught the attention of the neighbors living directly below. One of the neighbors, already upset with the noise, knocked on the apartment door. She warned them to keep the noise down or will report the violation to the police. Tesfaye, Brittany, and Tanisha became enraged at being interrupted and went downstairs to confront the neighbors who dared to complain. They kicked in the neighbor's door in a fit of anger and threatened them, and this finally made the terrified neighbor call 911. While the attackers were distracted downstairs dealing with the neighbor, Michael saw his only opportunity to escape. He managed to free himself from his restraints and ran out of the apartment as fast as his injured body would carry him, stumbling down the stairs and out into the freezing Chicago evening. That's when Officer Donnelly found him wandering down the street just blocks away, dressed in summer clothes in the middle of a freezing Chicago winter that made his condition even more alarming. One of the other officers responding to the 911 call then ran his name, and a missing person alert came back, identifying him as the missing young man from Crystal Lake, northwest of Chicago. The officers immediately rushed him to the hospital where doctors treated him for the cuts, bruises, and lacerations covering his body. Once he was stabilized, the officers released him to his anxious family, who had been informed about his whereabouts and condition. His brother-in-law, David Boyd, spoke to the press on behalf of the family and expressed their overwhelming relief.
Trying to stick together as a family. I'm just happy he's home.
Within hours, the Facebook video had gone viral across social media platforms, with thousands of people sharing it in horror and outrage. Tips started flooding into the Chicago Police Department from people who recognized the apartment, the voices, or the attackers themselves. Authorities would later confirm that the victim endured 4 to 5 hours of this attack, with the live stream capturing only about half an hour of his suffering. Facebook also responded to the incident by pulling down the original stream and emphasizing that the platform does not allow people to celebrate or glorify crime in live videos. Within the next 36 hours, Chicago police arrested all 4 suspects, connecting them to both the live-streamed violence and the 911 call about the kicked-in door. They were charged with aggravated kidnapping, hate crimes, aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, and unlawful restraint. Prosecutors emphasized that the hate crime charges stemmed directly from the racial slurs used during the attack and the fact that they specifically targeted someone with disabilities, making it clear this wasn't random violence. The case also sparked massive controversy that went far beyond just the attack itself. Some media outlets initially misreported the crucial details, actually reversing the races of the victim and attackers in their early coverage, which led to widespread accusations of bias and reluctance to call out anti-white racism. A hashtag called #BLMKidnapping began trending on social media and was mentioned over 480,000 times, with users falsely linking the attack to the Black Lives Matter movement despite having no evidence whatsoever. However, police explicitly and repeatedly stated there was absolutely no connection to Black Lives Matter or any organized movement, emphasizing that this was the work of 4 individuals acting on their own hatred. The reaction from political leaders to the incident was immediate and intense. President Barack Obama called the incident despicable during a radio interview where he connected it to broader issues of hate in America.
Whether it's hate crimes of the despicable sort that has just now recently surfaced on Facebook,
while Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel told reporters it was sickening and that the entire city should be horrified by what the perpetrators had done to an innocent young man. When it came time for sentencing after months of legal proceedings, all 4 eventually pleaded guilty through plea deals to avoid all the gory details of their crime from going public. Jordan Hill, who was considered the ringleader because he initiated the kidnapping, received an 8 years prison sentence. Tesfaye Cooper was sentenced to 7 years behind bars, and Tanisha Covington received 3 years in prison. Brittany Covington, who live-streamed the entire attack to her Facebook followers, avoided prison time entirely and instead received 4 years of probation and 200 hours of community service. By 2023, both Jordan and Tesfaye had already been released on parole after serving less than their full sentences, meaning they spent fewer than 7 years behind bars for what they'd done. But this won't be the only time that Chicago would watch a nightmare through a screen. The next video footage would solve a case that the city fought to keep hidden.
This boy been shot, and it's a lot of bullet holes in there.
It was October 20th, 2014, around 10 p.m. on Chicago's South Side, and police officers were responding to several 911 calls about someone with a knife trying to break into trucks in a commercial area near 41st Street and Pulaski Road. The person they were looking for was Laquan McDonald, who was carrying a 3-inch folding knife, which he was waving around trying to threaten the nearby truckers. To understand what led to that night, it's important to note that Laquan's life had been unstable from the very beginning. At just 3 years old, Laquan was placed under the custody of the government, and from there, he began to bounce through multiple foster placements. In some of these homes, Laquan would allegedly experience severe mistreatment, whippings, inappropriate touching, things no child should ever experience. Although these incidents were reported to the authorities, the allegations were deemed unfounded because there wasn't enough evidence to prove what happened. And perhaps most troubling of all, no one ever provided therapy to help him process any of it. School became another place where things fell apart. He repeated 1st grade, and when he was 10 years old, he was expelled after throwing a chair at a teacher while having an anger episode. That incident would be the first of many transfers, as he ended up attending half a dozen different schools, each one another fresh start that somehow never lasted. By the time he turned 13, he was hospitalized in a psychiatry hospital 3 times and was smoking up to 30 blunts a day, and the arrests started piling up. Between age 13 to 17, Laquan was arrested 26 times, mostly for drug possession charges, and would end up spending 4 months in detention in 2014 for probation violations. But even with all of this weighing on him, there were still glimpses of something different breaking through. In September 2014, he enrolled at Sullivan House, which was an alternative school designed specifically for at-risk youth, and for the first time in years, things actually seemed to be turning around for him. He was earning A's and B's in his classes, and his teachers said he was committed to showing real progress. He talked about his future, about becoming a nurse, and maybe starting his own business someday. There was potential there, real potential, until the October 2014 incident changed everything. When the officers arrived at the scene, they watched Laquan from a distance as he punctured a police vehicle's tire with his knife and smashed the windshield. They began to shout instructions, telling him to drop his knife and stop running, but Laquan kept moving, refusing to drop the weapon. The officers on scene requested a taser unit and followed him while keeping their distance. But then Jason Van Dyke, a 36-year-old officer, and his partner pulled up to the scene. Jason was a 14-year veteran in the police department and had about 20 citizen complaints filed against him. 10 of them were about the use of excessive force and 2 involving threatening use of a firearm. However, none of the complaints ended in discipline. Within 6 seconds of Officer Jason getting to the scene and stepping out of his vehicle, he opened fire on Laquan. He emptied his entire 16-round magazine in just 15 seconds, and Laquan dropped to the ground, but Jason kept shooting. In one of the dashcam videos, a police officer is seen kicking Laquan's body after all those shots. The video also showed that Laquan was actually facing away from the officers, meaning he posed no immediate threat. Yet among the 12 cop vehicles that responded to the scene that night, only Officer Jason opened fire. Within the next few minutes, an ambulance arrived at the scene to transport Laquan to Mount Sinai Hospital, where he was pronounced dead at 10:42 p.m. The medical examiner's autopsy, which was made public by journalist Jamie Calvin through a public records request, showed that Laquan was hit 16 times, with bullets striking his scalp, neck, right chest, right arm, left forearm, right hand, right leg, and left elbow, plus in the back. The death was immediately ruled as a homicide case. Toxicology tests showed PCP and marijuana in his blood and urine, which may have explained his erratic behavior that night. But what happened next would prove far more disturbing than the shooting itself. The officers on scene immediately filed their reports, and according to their statements, Laquan had lunged at them aggressively with his knife raised across his chest. They described him as an active threat who advanced on officers, forcing Jason to shoot in self-defense, and the reports classified the officers as victims, while Laquan was labeled as the aggressor. Jason told the investigators that he feared Laquan would rush him with the knife or throw it, and even recalled a 2012 department bulletin that warned about unusual knives, including one capable of firing a bullet, and spring-loaded or throwing knives, as if Laquan's 3-inch folding knife fit that description. The dashcam footage of the scene existed from the very beginning, with 3 police vehicles, including Jason's SUV, having cameras that night, but the city refused to release it. And when the footage was finally released on the 24th of November 2015, there was no audio, even though dashcam systems were supposed to record audio automatically when emergency lights are activated, which they were that night. This missing audio was significant because it prevented the public from hearing any verbal commands the officers may have given to Laquan, or any discussion among the officers immediately following the shooting, leaving a crucial gap in the official account. The CPD policy required officers to make sure video systems worked and submit repair tickets if they couldn't download recorded data. But there were no repair tickets from those 3 dash cams which weren't working. At first, city officials blamed a technical problem, but later, records from police technicians revealed that audio equipment in one vehicle had been intentionally damaged. Another car's audio was disabled because one officer had inserted the batteries of the microphone backwards and kept it in the glove compartment. Another had a corrupted mobile startup recorder, and another car's camera was busy processing other video. The head of the Chicago Fraternal Order of Police at the time, Dean Angelo, defended officers by saying operator error could be accidents, and argued that responsibility always trickles downhill to beat officers instead of the agency. But the police dashcams weren't the only cameras at the scene that night. There was a surveillance system from a Burger King outlet close to the scene that captured the shooting. However, the surveillance system had an 86-minute gap during the shooting, raising immediate suspicions.
According to a district manager for Burger King, police entered one of their restaurants not long after the shooting and erased footage from the company's security cameras.
But FBI analysis later confirmed the footage hadn't been tampered with, as the system itself was faulty, and there were similar gaps throughout its recordings. The Chicago City Council moved fast to cover the case, and in April 2015, they settled with Laquan's family for $5 million. The settlement came before any charges were filed, or the video was public, and part of the settlement agreement was that the video be sealed until investigations were completed. Shortly after the settlement was finalized, though, a whistleblower sent a message to a Chicago journalist, Jamie Calvin, who previously pushed for the release of Laquan's medical autopsy, and his lawyer, Professor Craig Futterman, warning that the actual footage existed and that it was horrific. This prompted both men to send at least 15 requests to the city, but each was denied. But everything changed on the 19th of November, 2015, when Cook County Judge Franklin Valderrama ordered the city to release the footage. Finally, on the 24th of November, 2015, more than 13 months after the shooting, the truth about what happened that night was made public. The footage was devastating, showing Laquan walking away from officers when Jason opened fire. After the first shots dropped him to the ground, Jason kept shooting, completely contradicting the police reports that had described Laquan as an active, advancing threat. The same day the video was released, the Cook County State Attorney, Anita Alvarez, charged Jason with first-degree murder, prompting Jason to turn himself in the same day. Protests erupted across Chicago, with the citizens demanding answers about why it took over a year to charge him and why the city had fought so hard to hide the footage. Cook County State's Attorney Anita said the judge's ruling pushed up her timeline, claiming she'd been conducting a thorough investigation, but many weren't buying it. Protesters blocked the intersection of Roosevelt and Michigan, chanting 16 shots, which later turned into 16 shots and a cover-up. Marchers disrupted shopping downtown, causing businesses to close down. The police had to shut down the entire Michigan Avenue, placed a seat-at-home curfew for 16 hours, and arrested people who violated the curfew. The Chicago Office of Inspector General launched an investigation into what happened that night, and their findings, detailed in a 2016 report that wasn't fully released until 2019, were shocking. At least 16 Chicago police officers and supervisors had been involved in falsifying reports to exaggerate the threat Laquan posed. The Inspector General recommended firing 11 officers for making false statements and other violations, with 4 others facing discipline for failing to activate dashcam audio and video systems. The report emphasized what it called a code of silence. Officers had watched the video together before writing their reports, coordinating their lies in real time, but implementation was slow and inconsistent, with police superintendent disagreeing with some of the recommendations and claiming insufficient evidence. Only 4 officers were actually fired in July 2019, while others resigned or were cleared. The fallout from these revelations hit hard, and on the 1st of December 2025, Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel fired the police superintendent Gary McCarty. He also stripped Jason of his police powers, but couldn't fire him due to the ongoing Independent Police Review Authority investigation, which required him to remain in the force till the end of the investigations. In an effort to prevent the cover-up from happening again, the mayor put together a police accountability task force, led by the then president of the Chicago Police Board. On the 16th of December 2015, Jason was indicted by a grand jury on 6 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of official misconduct.
He waved the knife from his lower right side upwards, across his body, towards my left shoulder.
Jason pled not guilty to these charges the 29th of December of the same year. In March 2017, prosecutors added 16 counts of aggravated battery, 1 for each shot, and ordered the other officers who were present at the scene to testify before a grand jury. In June of the same year, 3 among the previously fired officers were also indicted: Jason's partner Joseph Walsh, Officer Thomas Gaffney, and Detective David March. They faced conspiracy, official misconduct, and obstruction of justice charges for allegedly fabricating reports to shield Jason, and their trial began in November 2018. On the 17th of January 2019, Judge Domenica Stevenson acquitted all 3, ruling that the discrepancies between their reports and the video could be explained by stress and different vantage points, not intentional lies. The verdict outraged Laquan's family and activists, who saw it as proof that the code of silence was still protecting officers. Jason's trial began in September 2018, marking the first time a Chicago police officer faced murder charges for an on-duty shooting in over 50 years. The defense argued Jason feared for his life and pointed to Laquan's knife, his erratic behavior, and the PCP in his system. On the 18th of January 2019, Judge Vincent Goggin sentenced Jason to 81 months, 6 years and 9 months on the murder charge alone, and he imposed no sentence on the 16 aggravated battery counts, each of which could have carried 6 to 30 years. Prosecutors had asked for 18 to 20 years and argued the battery counts were more serious and should carry consecutive sentences, while the defense had asked for probation. On the 3rd of February 2022, he was released on good behavior after serving 39 months, less than half of his sentence, eligible due to good behavior, and placed on mandatory supervised release. Laquan's grandmother, Tracy Hunter, was devastated.
It's a very hurt feeling because that man didn't serve his time. He did not serve his time. That man took my firstborn grandchild from me.
While that was such a devastating closure for Laquan's family, this next footage captured the moment where a family's joy turned into a bloody mess caused by an outsider. It was December 11th, 2022, around 2 o'clock in the morning, and outside Vera Lounge on Chicago's North Central Avenue. The cold air carried the sound of celebration from inside. Vera Lounge was a food bar, opened in 2021 by Carlos Vera Jr., specializing in Latin cuisine and hosting events in the Portage Park neighborhood. On this Saturday night, Carlos's brother, Ricky Vera, was there celebrating his daughter, Mariah Vera's 25th birthday with friends and family. But someone who hadn't been invited by the family showed up. Samuel Parsons Salas, who was then 32 years old, arrived with his girlfriend, who I'll be calling Talia, Talia, and while she knew some people at the party, the Vera family didn't know him. He'd been dating Talia for about 2 weeks and had only been out of prison for 3 months. Back in 2009, he had been involved in an armed home invasion in Albany Park, where 2 people were fatally shot during a robbery, but he wasn't charged until 5 years later in 2014. In 2018, he took a plea deal for the armed home invasion instead of going to trial on charges that could have kept him locked up for life, and he got 8 years with credit for time already served, but he was paroled in September 2022. 3 months later, he was at Vera Lounge. Around 2:20 in the morning, a fight broke out inside the bar, and in that scuffle, someone struck Mariah. Samuel was asked to leave since he was involved in the fight. Around the same time, the lights in the lounge came on for last call, meaning that the lounge was about to close up for the night, and people began to walk toward the exits. But Mariah's father, Ricky, wasn't about to let this go, and he followed the party group outside, demanding to know who had hit his daughter. Surveillance cameras captured what happened next. On the street, Ricky Vera confronted Samuel since he was involved in the fight, yelling at him to name the person who had hit Mariah. Talia quickly stepped between them, trying to calm the 2 men down, but the confrontation only intensified as the men started shouting louder and a crowd began to form around them. That's when people in the crowd started calling out Samuel's name as the one who had hit Mariah. This enraged Samuel, who walked to his SUV parked nearby and retrieved something before coming back to the scene. He had a gun in his hand and he fired past Talia, striking Ricky 3 times in the head and chest, who instantly dropped to the ground. But Samuel didn't stop there. He then turned to face 26-year-old Mario Pozuelos, a part of Mariah's close-knit group who was standing nearby when the shooting started. Samuel fired multiple shots, hitting him in the head and throat, causing him to stumble and fall to the curb. The group scattered in every direction down Central Avenue, running for their lives as Samuel began firing at anyone in sight. While that was going on, Mariah rushed out of the lounge to her father's side, trying to help him. She paid no attention to Samuel, who was standing a few feet away and had locked his eyes on her. Samuel walked toward Mariah and shot her in the head at point-blank range. The force of the bullet shattered her skull, leaving bone fragments lodged in her brain. Samuel still didn't leave. Instead, he walked up to Mario's body as he lay there, firing more rounds at close range. Across the street, Mercedes Tavares, a close friend of Talia and a 24-year-old mother of 3 very young children, tried to hide behind a white van. However, Samuel noticed her and walked up to where she was hiding and shot her multiple times before firing again as she lay wounded.
She was so scared. She was so scared.
Then Samuel ran, forcing Talia into the driver's seat of a dark SUV at gunpoint and threatening to end her life if she tried to escape or contact anyone. He then jumped into the passenger seat and made her drive him away from the scene. By the time the first responders arrived at the scene, it was already too late. Ricky Vera, Mario Pozuelos, and Mercedes Tavares were pronounced dead at the scene, and Mariah, the birthday girl, was rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital with injuries so severe that doctors told her family she would never recover her brain function. The next day, December 12th, police got a tip about where Samuel was hiding, and a SWAT team surrounded an apartment in the 5200 block of West Montrose. When officers moved in, he tried to run out the back door, but they chased him down and arrested him. Back at the police station, Samuel confessed, admitting to the shootings, and that he targeted the people who had identified him for hitting Mariah during the confrontation with Ricky, although he expressed remorse for Mercedes Tavares' death. On December 13th, Samuel was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted murder, aggravated battery with a firearm, and holding someone against their will. The day after his arrest, Samuel appeared in court, while prosecutors laid out the evidence, the surveillance video, the confession, and the witnesses, causing the judge to deny him bail as he was a danger to the community. Chicago Police Superintendent David Brown had strong words, saying, "Get this person off our streets," and calling the attack heartless, while questioning why someone with Samuel's violent history had been released on parole just months before. On December 15th, the city shut down the bar, issuing a summary closure order for public safety, while the families of the victims were left to pick up the pieces.
Good evening. The Chicago Police Superintendent determining that this bar, Vera Lounge, is a risk to the public. It has been shut down following that mass shooting over the weekend. As you can see, the orange sticker has been placed on the front door of the Vera Lounge by the city, and it has been closed indefinitely.
Mario Pozuelos' brother set up a fundraiser, writing that Mario had been taken too soon and had his whole life ahead of him. Mercedes Tavares' partner created another fundraiser, describing her as a wonderful mother who adored their 3 children and was excited about creating holiday memories. And then there was Mariah, who remained in critical condition on life support at the hospital. Her family believed that she was holding on to give them time to grieve and accept what had happened and prepare to say goodbye. Months turned into years, and Mariah's condition didn't improve. In August 2025, nearly 3 years after the shooting, her family made the difficult decision to move her to hospice care at Advocate Illinois Masonic Medical Center. A fundraiser was set up to help with the estimated $20,000 in final medical and burial costs, and family members described her as loving, kind, giving, and selfless. On August 21st, 2025, Mariah passed away at 28 years old, and her funeral was held 4 days later. With her passing, prosecutors indicated they would likely update the charges against Samuel to include a 4th count of murder, and as of early 2026, he remains in custody awaiting trial, with sentencing still pending. Justice delayed will not necessarily be denied, but in this next case, justice will be denied even when the surveillance footage proved otherwise.
The ambulance got a gunshot victim. Shots fired by the police.
It was March 29th, 2021, just past 2:30 in the morning in Chicago's Little Village neighborhood, when a ShotSpotter alert picked up 8 gunshots near 2300 South Sawyer Avenue. The shots had been fired at a passing vehicle, and 2 911 calls reported shots fired. Immediately, Chicago police officers Eric Stillman and Karina Gallegos responded to the scene. When they arrived, they spotted 2 people walking in an alley, 21-year-old Ruben Roman and 13-year-old Adam Toledo, and the moment the officers approached, both young men took off running. Adam was a 7th grader who lived in Little Village, a predominantly Latino community on Chicago's west side. He had no criminal record, but he'd been reported missing by his mother just 3 days earlier, on March 26th, before returning home. Now he was out again in the middle of the night with Ruben, a 21-year-old who had pleaded guilty to illegal gun possession in 2019 and was known to have gang ties. At 13, Adam was being pulled into a dangerous world by someone 8 years older, and that night, that influence would cost him everything. Officer Eric captured and tackled Ruben first, searched him for weapons, and found nothing before handing him off to his partner. But Adam was still on the run, disappearing down the alley toward 24th Street, which meant the chase was on. Body camera footage captured everything that happened next as Eric ran behind Adam, yelling commands.
Please stop! 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 Hey, show me your head!
Adam ran about a full block before stopping at a gap in a wooden fence behind Farragut High School, allowing Eric to catch up and flash a strobe light across his body. Eric spotted the gun in Adam's right hand and yelled for him to drop the gun and show his hands.
Hey, show me your head! Stop it!
Adam turned toward him with his right arm partially hidden by the fence, and as he tossed the gun along the fence line with his right hand, while raising his left hand open, Eric fired a single shot in less than 1 second, 838 milliseconds to be exact. The bullet struck Adam in the left chest, and he collapsed instantly. Eric rushed forward immediately, calling for an ambulance.
Shots fired, get an ambulance up here now.
He checked for where Adam was shot, knowing the blood trickling out of Adam's chest and mouth. Eric applied a chest seal and started CPR while telling Adam to stay with him till backup arrived.
Stay with me, hey, stay with me.
Hey, stay awake, man.
Put the chest press on. I'm gonna start CPR, I'm not feeling a heartbeat.
Go ahead, I'm trying as fast as I can.
I gotta get this chest seal in first.
As fast as I can, try to get this chest seal open.
By the time the other officers and the paramedics arrived, it was already too late. Adam was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation that followed revealed a Ruger 9mm semi-automatic pistol, empty and in slide lock position, that was found at the scene. Crime scene analysts matched the pistol to 7 shell casings found at the initial shooting location, where Ruben and Adam had been spotted. The forensics also found gunshot residue on Adam's right hand and both of his sweatshirt cuffs, and DNA testing showed Adam was a major contributor to the mixture found on the gun, which meant he had handled that weapon. The autopsy confirmed a single gunshot wound to the chest, front to back, left to right, with a downward trajectory, and the medical examiner classified Adam's death as a homicide. In the days after the shooting, the city was under pressure to release the body camera footage, but officials held it back due to the ongoing investigations. During that time, the public had to rely on Eric's official statement of the incident being an armed confrontation. On April 10th, 2021, exactly 12 days after the incident, a court hearing was held for Ruben, and the prosecutors confirmed he was actually the one who fired at the passing vehicle before passing the gun to Adam to save himself. He was charged with endangerment, aggravated unlawful use of a weapon, and reckless discharge of a firearm. Cook County Assistant State's Attorney James Murphy also stated that since Adam was holding the gun when he was shot, it justified Eric's actions, and that statement shaped how people understood the incident for the next 5 days. But when the body camera footage was finally released on April 15th, it showed what had actually happened. That Adam had already tossed the gun behind the fence and had his hands raised when Eric fired. James was immediately suspended and later resigned from his position. An internal investigation found no intent to mislead, concluding he had made an honest mistake rather than deliberately lying. But the damage was already done because for 5 critical days, the public believed Adam had been holding a gun when he was shot. When the video showed Adam's empty hands raised in the air, it looked like a cover-up, and trust in the official account collapsed. Surveillance video from the high school and a nearby building backed up what the body camera showed, and an eyewitness from an adjacent apartment reported seeing Adam comply with commands.
Chicago Emergency Sampler.
Yeah, there was about 7 or 8 gunshots fired on the 2300 block of South Sawyer.
2300 block of Sawyer?
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of commotion right now.
Did you see anything?
No, I just heard it.
How many did you hear?
6 or 7.
I said, how many shots did you hear?
6 or 7.
6 or 7. Okay, what's your name?
I want to remain anonymous.
Okay, thank you.
On March 15, 2022, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office announced that no criminal charges would be filed against Eric. Their reasoning was that Eric reasonably believed Adam posed an imminent threat in that split second, and under Illinois law, that made the use of force justifiable. But not everyone agreed with that assessment, which is why the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, known as COPPA, launched their own investigation into Eric's actions that night. COPPA is Chicago's independent agency responsible for investigating police misconduct, and after reviewing all the evidence, they officially determined the complaints were justified, and that he had indeed violated department rules. Specifically, they found he had broken policies on the use of deadly force by shooting Adam when he was no longer an immediate threat, and that he had violated foot pursuit protocols by failing to properly assess the situation, communicate with dispatchers, and consider alternatives before chasing Adam down that alley. COPPA recommended his termination, believing the violations were serious enough to warrant firing Eric from the police force. But former police superintendent David Brown reviewed the same case and came to a different conclusion. He agreed that Eric had violated some rules, like not activating his body camera quickly enough, but he didn't think those infractions warranted termination. Instead, David recommended just a 5-day suspension for the minor violations only. The case went to the Chicago Police Board for final determination, but as of early 2026, it remained stuck because of a fight over where these hearings should take place. A 2023 union contract gave officers like Eric the option to have their cases heard through private arbitration instead of public police board hearings, and Eric chose arbitration. The problem was that courts ruled these arbitration hearings had to be public to maintain accountability, but the police union appealed that decision, arguing it violated their labor rights. While this legal battle played out through the court system, all disciplinary proceedings were frozen, which meant approximately 21 to 25 serious misconduct cases, including Eric's, were stuck waiting for a resolution that could take years. Adam's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the city, and Eric alleging excessive force and failure to de-escalate the situation before shooting. And by mid-2024, the city had paid over $1.1 million in legal fees to defend against that lawsuit, which remained unresolved to this day. But that's not all. In July 2025, a court increased Eric's disability benefits for PTSD from 50% to 75% of his salary, which means he would receive more taxpayer-funded payments for the mental health trauma he claimed to have suffered from the shooting. The court decided that his PTSD was directly caused by the incident and not related to any pre-existing conditions he might have had. But Adam's family challenged that decision in August 2025, arguing that the original, lower assessment of 50% had been the correct one because Eric did have pre-existing mental health issues like anxiety that weren't caused by the shooting. They believed the increased benefits were unjustified and that taxpayers shouldn't be paying Eric more money for shooting their son. But not all of Chicago's violence happens in dark alleys in the middle of the night. This next case happened in broad daylight in the heart of Chicago's wealthiest shopping district.
It was a Chicago rapper who was gunned down here on one of Chicago's ritziest streets.
It was August 4th, 2020, around 4:26 in the afternoon on Chicago's Gold Coast, where tourists window shop and luxury stores lined the streets. FBG Duck, a 26-year-old rapper, was standing outside a Dolce & Gabbana store, shopping for his son's birthday with his girlfriend, who I will refer to as Sammy. That's when two cars, a black Ford Fusion and a silver Chrysler 300, pulled up to the front of the store. 4 masked men jumped out, and without saying a word, they opened fire. But to understand why this happened, we need to go back years earlier to a war that had been building on Chicago's South Side for decades. Two gangs had been fighting for control of the Chicago South Side territory, the Gangster Disciples and the Black Disciples. They used to be one united group called the Black Gangster Disciple Nation, formed back in 1966 under leaders Larry Hoover and David Barksdale. But when David died of kidney failure in 1974 from injuries he'd suffered in a 1968 assassination attempt, everything fell apart. Larry, who was already in prison for murder, tried to take full control of the organization, but David's loyalists weren't having it. Rumors spread that Larry thought he deserved to be the sole king, and old grudges that David had kept in check started bubbling back up. By 1978, the Black Gangster Disciple Nation had split into two rival factions, Larry's Gangster Disciples and the Black Disciples led by David's followers. By the 2010s, the gangs had broken down into much smaller groups that controlled just 1 or 2 blocks instead of entire neighborhoods. These smaller crews weren't fighting over big territory anymore. They were beefing over personal grudges, old murders, and disrespect between people who sometimes lived just a few streets apart from each other. In August 2011, a 20-year-old named Odie was shot and killed. He was a member of the Black Disciples, and word on the street was that a 17-year-old girl named Gakira from St. Lawrence Gangster Disciples faction, better known as STL, had pulled the trigger. After his death, his crew renamed their territory O-Block in his honor, turning Parkway Gardens into both a memorial to their fallen friend and a stronghold they were ready to defend with their lives. The Black Disciples at O-Block were weren't going to let that slide. In gang culture, if someone from your crew gets killed, you're expected to retaliate by going after the people who did it or anyone from their gang. It's an unwritten rule that keeps the violence going in endless circles. A few months later, in November 2011, a 15-year-old named Shondell got shot and killed in the streets. His friends called him Tuka, and he was from STL, the same gangster disciples faction that Gakira belonged to. When Street Talk said O-Block was behind it as payback for Odie's death, Tuka's crew responded by renaming themselves Tukaville in his memory. Now both sides had lost someone and had a name to avenge, and both sides were ready to keep killing until they felt like the score was even. Among those who grew up in Tukaville was a young man named Carlton Weekly, and from O-Block was a kid named David Bennett. Both of them had dreams of making it out through music, and they would become rappers who turned their street lives into songs. But the girl who had allegedly started it all, Gakira, was still out there, and her reputation only grew more fearsome as time went on. By 2014, she was known as a feared assassin who had been linked to multiple murders despite being barely out of high school. Then came the music that changed everything and made the violence even more public. Artists in the both gangs started calling out rivals in their diss tracks, mocking the deceased, and turning real violence into content that anyone could watch on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram with millions of views. Carlton became FBG Duck the Rapper, and his songs targeted O-Block directly and aggressively, pouring gasoline on a fire that was already burning. His songs challenged rivals to actually follow through on their threats, questioning whether they were really about that life or just talking tough. He rapped about making people prove their intentions with action, about shooting up places where enemies were hiding, and about the violence being real and not accidental. Davon became King Von, and his music was just as aggressive from the O-Block side. In 2014, Gakira was shot and killed in Woodland, and people said King Von killed her, because just like FBD Duck, he put it all in his music, making sure everyone knew what happened. And just when it seemed like things were beginning to subside, in 2017, FBG Duck's older brother, FBG Brick, who was also a STL member, was shot and killed in the Woodlawn neighborhood on 63rd and St. Lawrence, and that loss hit FBG Duck hard, making his music get darker and angrier as he channeled his grief into more aggressive tracks. Then came July 2020, when FBG Duck dropped a song called Dead, where he mocked Odie, T-Roy, and other O-Block members who had died. The video got over 50 million views on YouTube and spread everywhere, making it impossible for O-Block to ignore. In the song lyrics, Duck said, "I wasn't gonna diss the dead, and okay, I did it, but T-Roy and Odie, them dead. I know you heard about Lil Boo. They left his by a tire. Bullets was hitting him. He was singing like Mariah. Yeah, you heard about Sheroid? I know that hurt the heart. He probably walking, listening to his iPod." Following the release of that song, the streets started buzzing with talk of retaliation, and King Von allegedly put a $100,000 bounty on FBG Duck's head, though nobody knew for sure if that was true. But what happened next was very real and deadly. Less than a month after Dead dropped, on August 4th, 2020, surveillance cameras at Parkway Gardens, O-Block's housing complex, captured 4 masked men descending the stairs in single file, wearing dark clothing and hoods, moving fast like they had somewhere to be. They split into 2 groups, with 2 getting into a black Ford Fusion and 2 getting into a silver Chrysler 300 before driving north toward downtown Chicago. For the next 16 minutes, the Fusion in front and the Chrysler trailing behind made their way from the South Side projects to Chicago's wealthiest shopping district. At 4:26 p.m., they arrived at East Oak Street, where FBG Duck was standing outside that Dolce & Gabbana store with Sammy, just shopping for his son's birthday. The overhead street cameras captured the moment the cars pulled up abruptly in front of FBG Duck's girlfriend's dark sedan, blocking traffic on the busy street. The doors flew open, and 2 gunmen jumped out of the Fusion's passenger side while 2 more exited the Chrysler. They immediately opened fire at FBG Duck, firing at least 38 rounds in 15 seconds. FBG Duck tried to take cover behind the car as pedestrians scattered in every direction, but he was hit 16 times in the chest, back, and limbs. Sammy was also shot in the hand, and a bystander caught one in the leg. As if that was not enough, the gunman walked up close to where FBG Duck had fallen, firing at point-blank range to make sure their job was done before casually walking back to the cars and driving off. Police arrived at the scene as witnesses screamed for help, but FBG Duck had been bleeding out on the ground for about 17 minutes, and by the time the paramedics finally transported him to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, which was only 5 to 10 minutes away, he was already dead. As detectives began investigating FBG Duck's death, they pulled surveillance footage from cameras across the city and discovered that the same cameras that tracked the shooters to the Gold Coast had also tracked them back. The footage showed the Chrysler passing through 8 different locations as it made its way south, heading straight back to O-Block. At 4:56 p.m., exactly 30 minutes after they left, cameras at Parkway Gardens captured the Chrysler pulling back into the parking lot and stepping out of the car, giving investigators everything they needed to build their case. After 15 months of gathering evidence, interviewing bystanders who were at the crime scene, and building a case against the suspect. The detectives arrested 5 men: Charles C. Murda Liggins, Kenneth Kenny Mac Robertson, Carlos Lewis Offord, Christopher C. Thang Thomas, and Marcus Muop Smart. In 2023, a 6th man named Ralph T.Z. Turpin was added to the case, though a 7th suspect, Azel Zelmana Rawls, had taken his own life in 2021 before he could be charged. The case proceeded to trial and lasted 3 months as the jury sat through all that surveillance footage, heard from witnesses, and examined all the evidence that prosecutors presented. On January 17, 2024, roughly 3.5 years after the murder, all 6 men were convicted of racketeering-related charges, bringing some closure to FBG Duck's family after years of waiting. They faced mandatory life sentences, but as of now, those sentences have been delayed multiple times, first into 2025 and then into 2026. All sentencing dates were actually cancelled in November 2025, and nobody knows exactly why the courts keep pushing them back. Meanwhile, FBG Duck's mother filed a wrongful death lawsuit in October 2024 against Lil Durk, Davin's estate, record labels, and others, claiming they profited from the violence and turned real pain into entertainment. In January 2026, a court allowed the case to move forward, adding another layer to a story that still hasn't fully ended. The convictions were in, but the story wasn't over, and the questions about who else might be held accountable were still being asked.